You know, they say age brings wisdom, but what it really brings is clarity. The kind of clarity that comes from watching the world long enough to recognize patterns, to see the truth hiding in plain sight. I'm 73 years old now, sitting in this small apartment in Scottsdale, Arizona, and I've got nothing but time to tell you this story. Pour yourself a drink if you've got one handy. This is going to take a while. It started 15 years ago, back in 2010. I was 58 then, working as a senior accountant at Morrison & Blake in downtown Phoenix. 26 years I'd given that firm, climbing from junior bookkeeper to partner track. My wife, Linda, was 56, still beautiful in that carefully maintained way that suburban women perfect. The right highlights, the right yoga classes, the right circles of friends who lunched at the country club. We lived in Paradise Valley, one of those neighborhoods where every house tries to out-Spanish colonial the next one, where the lawns stay green despite the desert trying to reclaim its territory, where everyone drives German cars and pretends their lives are perfect. Our house was a 4-bedroom mission-style thing with a pool I never used and a game room the kids had abandoned years ago. Speaking of the kids, that's where this story really begins, doesn't it? There was Michael, our oldest. 32 at the time, working in commercial real estate in San Diego. He'd always been the golden child, the one who made straight A's without trying, who quarterbacked his high school team to the state semifinals, who married a girl from a good family and gave us 2 grandchildren I doted on. He had my mother's eyes, everyone always said. Funny how these little comments lodge in your brain like splinters. Then came Sarah, 29, living in Seattle, doing something with tech startups that I never fully understood but that seemed to pay well. She was fierce, independent, always marching to her own drummer. She'd gotten into Brown, for God's sake. I remembered the pride I felt when that acceptance letter came. I remembered thinking she had my drive, my ambition. And finally, there was James, the baby at 26. He'd been a surprise. Linda got pregnant right when we thought we were done with diapers and sleepless nights. James was different from the other 2. Artistic, sensitive, what they call these days. Neurodivergent. He'd struggled in school, struggled with jobs, was still finding himself in Los Angeles, waiting tables and going to auditions. I loved him fiercely, maybe because he needed me more than the others did. 3 children I'd raised, fed, clothed, educated. 3 weddings I'd paid for or would pay for. 3 college funds I'd emptied my bonuses into. 3 lives I'd shaped with every decision I made about my career, about staying in jobs I sometimes hated because the benefits were good, because they needed stability, because that's what a father does. I loved them the way I imagine all fathers love their children, imperfectly, but completely. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me tell you about the day I started to suspect. It was a Thursday in March. I remember because Thursdays Linda had her book club, which meant she'd come home around 10, slightly wine-drunk and chatty, smelling of her friend Margaret's expensive perfume. Only this Thursday, she came home at 7:30, stone sober, quiet. Book club cancelled? I asked from my recliner, where I was watching the Suns game. Yes, she said, not quite meeting my eyes. Margaret's feeling under the weather. Here's the thing about being married for 36 years. You develop a sense for dishonesty the way dogs can smell fear. It's in the micro-expressions, the way someone holds their shoulders, the slight delay before answering. Linda was lying, and she wasn't even good at it. I didn't say anything. I just filed it away in the back of my mind, in the little folder marked things that don't add up. The next incident came 2 weeks later. I was working late, preparing for a difficult audit, when I realized I'd left an important file at home. I drove back around 8:30, pulling into our circular driveway just as an unfamiliar BMW was pulling out. The driver, a man I didn't recognize, maybe 45, 50, gave me a nod as he passed. Friendly, casual, like he hadn't just been at my house while I wasn't home. Linda was in the kitchen when I walked in, making tea with hands that trembled slightly. "Who was that?" I asked, keeping my voice light. "Who was who?" "The man leaving. The BMW." "Oh." Her laugh was too bright, too quick. "That was Richard." Margaret's husband. He was dropping off something for the charity auction. I didn't know Margaret's husband drove a BMW. New car, she said, turning away to pour hot water. You know Richard always has to have the latest thing. But I didn't know Richard. In 36 years of marriage, I'd never once met Margaret's husband, mainly because Margaret had been divorced for a decade. The folder in my mind marked "Things that don't add up" was getting thicker. I started paying attention after that. Really paying attention. I noticed how Linda had become religious about her phone privacy, taking it with her everywhere, even to the bathroom. I noticed the new lingerie that appeared in her drawer, tags carefully removed. I noticed how she'd started going to the gym 5 days a week instead of 3, how she'd gotten a new hairstyle, how she'd lost weight. All the classic signs, right? The ones everyone jokes about in sitcoms and bar conversations. The ones you never think will happen to you until they do. But here's where I differ from most men who find themselves in this situation. I didn't confront her. I didn't hire a private investigator. I didn't make a scene. I'm an accountant. My entire career has been built on patience, on gathering data, on seeing patterns that others miss. So I watched, and I waited, and I thought. And the more I thought, the more things started clicking into place. Little things, going back years. A decade. 2 decades. There was the time, right after Sarah was born, when Linda had become obsessed with a coworker from her old job at the hospital. She'd been a nurse before the kids, and she'd stayed in touch with some of her colleagues. One in particular, David, I think his name was, she'd mentioned constantly for a few months. Then suddenly, never again. I'd asked about him once, and she'd brushed me off, said he'd moved away. There was the period when Michael was in elementary school, maybe 2nd grade, when Linda had taken up tennis with a passion that bordered on mania. She'd been playing 3-4 times a week with a mixed doubles group. One of the men in that group had called the house a few times, and Linda had always taken those calls in another room. I'd thought nothing of it at the time. I was busy with work, with being a provider. Tennis seemed harmless. And then there was Todd. Todd was harder to forget because he'd been more visible in our lives. He was a neighbor, 3 houses down, married to a woman named Christine. Our families had been friendly, barbecues, holiday parties, the occasional dinner out. This was around the time James was born. I remembered how helpful Todd had been, always offering to help with yard work, to fix things around the house when I was swamped with work and a new baby. I remembered how his marriage to Christine had imploded spectacularly about 6 months after James was born. Screaming matches, a moving truck in the night, whispered gossip among the neighbors. Todd had moved to Texas, we'd heard. Christine had gotten the house in the divorce. All these little puzzle pieces, floating in my memory. I'd never thought to connect them before. But now, with Linda's affair right in front of me, I started to wonder. I started to see a pattern that should have been obvious all along. My wife was good at affairs. Too good. This wasn't her first rodeo. Which led me to a thought that I couldn't shake, no matter how hard I tried. A thought that started as a whisper and grew into a roar. What if it wasn't just about the affairs? What if it was about the timing? Michael was born 9 months after Linda's obsession with David. Sarah arrived during the tennis phase. And James came right in the middle of the Todd and Christine drama. I sat with these thoughts for weeks, letting them churn in my mind while I smiled at Linda over breakfast, while I kissed her goodnight, while I played the role of the oblivious husband she clearly thought I was. Finally, I did what any good accountant would do. I gathered data. It started with one of those DNA ancestry kits you see advertised everywhere. You know the ones. They promise to tell you where your great-great-grandparents came from, to connect you with distant cousins, to unlock the secrets of your heritage. I ordered it on Amazon, sent in my saliva sample, and waited. 6 weeks later, the results came back. They told me I was 42% British and Irish, 31% Scandinavian, 18% Western European, and 9% Ashkenazi Jewish. Interesting, but not what I was really after. What I was really after were the DNA matches. The site showed me people who shared my genetic material, arranged by how much DNA we had in common. Parents and children share about 50% of their DNA. Siblings share about 25%. The numbers get smaller from there. I scrolled through my matches with my heart pounding. There were some distant cousins I'd never heard of, some second and third cousins that made sense based on my family tree. But in that top category, where my children should have been, the people who shared 50% of my DNA, there was only one name. My sister, Barbara. No Michael. No Sarah. No James. I sat at my desk in the home office, staring at that screen, and felt the floor drop out from under my world. My hands were shaking. My vision blurred. For a moment, I thought I might be having a heart attack. But I'm not a man who makes decisions based on partial information. So I did more research. I learned about paternity, about DNA testing, about false negatives and testing errors. And then I ordered 3 more kits. I got Michael's DNA from a beer bottle when he visited for Sunday dinner. Sarah's from a hairbrush she left in the guest bathroom. James's from a water glass. I sent them all to a different testing company, one that specialized in paternity testing. I paid extra for the expedited results. 2 weeks later, I had my answer. Probability of paternity, 0%. 0%. 0%. Michael, Sarah, and James. All 3. None of them were mine. 33 years. 33 years I'd been raising another man's children. 3 men's children, most likely. I sat in my office and stared at those results for hours. I didn't cry. I didn't rage. I didn't break anything or drink myself into a stupor. I'm an accountant. I analyze. I calculate. And I plan. So that's what I did. I sat down, and I thought it through. Let me tell you what goes through a man's mind when he discovers his entire life has been a lie. You might think it's anger, and there was anger, burning hot enough to melt steel. You might think it's grief, and there was grief too, for the loss of my children, or rather, the loss of what I thought they were to me. But mostly, in those first days after I got those test results, what I felt was a sort of eerie calm. The kind of calm that comes when all the pieces finally click into place, when the mystery you've been living inside suddenly resolves itself with terrible clarity. I didn't confront Linda that day, or the next, or the day after that. Instead, I went to work like nothing had changed. I came home and asked about her day. I helped her make dinner. I watched television beside her on the couch, her head on my shoulder like it had been for decades. All the while my mind was working. Calculating. Planning. You have to understand, I'm good at what I do. 26 years at Morrison and Blake wasn't just about showing up and crunching numbers. I'd built a reputation as the man who could find anything. Hidden assets in divorce cases. Cooked books in fraud investigations. Money trails that led through shell companies and offshore accounts. The partners used to joke that I could find a dollar bill in a hurricane. They had no idea how right they were. So I started investigating my own life with the same cold precision I'd brought to hundreds of cases. I told Linda I was working on a big audit, that I'd be putting in late nights for a while. She didn't question it. Why would she? I'd been using work as an excuse for distance for years. I started with Michael. My oldest. The boy I'd taught to ride a bike, to throw a curveball, to change a tire. The young man I'd helped move into his college dorm, whose hand I'd shaken at his wedding, whose children called me Grandpa. I pulled up old photos from the year before he was born. There was Linda, laughing at some hospital function, standing next to a tall man with dark hair and blue eyes. The caption on the back, in Linda's handwriting. Me and David, hospital Christmas party, 1977. David. The coworker she'd been obsessed with, who'd supposedly moved away right around the time Michael was born. I found David on Facebook within an hour. David Morrison, living in Tucson, retired from nursing, grandfather of 4. And there in his profile picture was a face that could have been Michael's in 20 years. The same blue eyes, the same strong jaw, the same slightly crooked smile. My mother's eyes, everyone had always said about Michael. But my mother's eyes were brown. I'd never thought about that discrepancy before. Why would I? Next, I turned to Sarah. My brilliant, fierce daughter who'd inherited my drive, my ambition. Except she hadn't, had she? I dug through old boxes in the garage, looking for anything from the year before Sarah was born. I found a photo album Linda had kept from her tennis days. There were dozens of pictures of mixed doubles matches, group shots at the club, victory celebrations. One photo caught my eye. A doubles team posing with their trophy, Linda and a man named Robert Chin. They were standing close, his arm around her waist, both of them grinning at the camera with an intimacy that went beyond casual friendship. I found Robert Chin on LinkedIn. Chief Technology Officer at a Seattle-based startup. Brown University alumnus. And there in his professional headshot was Sarah's face, feminized but unmistakable. The same sharp cheekbones, the same intense dark eyes, the same slight dimple in the left cheek. The tech career that I'd never fully understood. The acceptance to Brown that had seemed like such a long shot. It all made horrible sense now. Finally, James. My sensitive, struggling youngest. The surprise baby who'd come along when we thought we were done. Todd wasn't hard to track down either. He was still in Texas, had remarried, owned a construction company in Austin. His Facebook was public, and there were plenty of photos. The resemblance was less obvious with James. He'd gotten more of Linda's features, her softer jaw and lighter coloring. But it was there in the artistic temperament, in the build, in certain expressions that I could see echoed in Todd's photos. I sat in my office surrounded by printouts and photographs, this terrible gallery of genetic truth, and I realized something that made me laugh. Actually laugh out loud, a sound so bitter it scared me. I was the only person in my family who wasn't related to anyone else in my family. Michael, Sarah, and James weren't siblings. They were half-siblings at best, connected only through Linda. And I was just, what? The man who'd paid for everything? The fool who never noticed. But I still wasn't ready to make my move. There was too much I didn't know. So I dug deeper. I accessed Linda's email. She'd never changed her password from the one we'd set up together years ago. I found messages going back years, but she'd been careful. No smoking guns, no explicit confessions. Just enough coded language and deleted messages to confirm what I already knew. The affair I'd discovered wasn't her first, or even her second ongoing situation. The man in the BMW, whose name was actually Richard, though he wasn't Margaret's husband, was just the latest in a very long line. I found credit card statements I'd never seen before, cards she'd opened in her name only. Charges at hotels in Phoenix and Scottsdale on days when she told me she was at book club or yoga or lunch with friends. Jewelry purchases that had never appeared on her body. Restaurant bills for two at places we'd never gone together. I found a second phone tucked in her gym bag, a cheap prepaid thing with a handful of contacts saved under female names that I was willing to bet weren't actually women. And I found something else, something that made my blood run cold. Life insurance policies. 3 of them, actually, all on me. She'd taken them out over the years, gradually increasing the coverage. The total death benefit was $8 million. Now, plenty of spouses have life insurance on each other. It's responsible, even smart. But what made my stomach turn was finding a consultation confirmation from a divorce attorney in her email, dated just 3 weeks earlier. She'd decided not to proceed with the divorce, the follow-up email said, after discussing the financial realities. It didn't take a genius to do that math. A divorce would mean splitting assets, probably giving me half of everything. My retirement accounts, the house, the investment portfolio I'd carefully built. Linda would end up with maybe $800,000, plus alimony I'd fight tooth and nail. But if I died? She'd get it all. The life insurance, the house, my retirement accounts as the beneficiary. Close to $4 million total, and no one to question her spending or her lifestyle, or the men she entertained. I found myself checking my car's brake lines, examining my food more carefully, second-guessing every time Linda offered to make me a drink. Was I being paranoid? Maybe. But probably not paranoid enough. That's when I knew I couldn't wait much longer. Whatever I was going to do, I had to do it soon. But I still didn't confront her. Not yet. Instead, I scheduled a physical with my doctor, a full workup, including a tox screen. I told him I'd been feeling off, tired, foggy. I wanted everything documented. If something happened to me, I wanted evidence. I updated my own will, using a lawyer Linda didn't know, at a firm across town. I changed my beneficiaries, my power of attorney, everything. And I started moving money. This is where being an accountant really paid off. I knew every trick, every loophole, every way to shift assets without raising red flags. I started with the offshore accounts I'd set up years ago for tax purposes, perfectly legal, perfectly documented. I began filtering money through them in ways that would be almost impossible to trace without a forensic accountant as good as I was. I opened new accounts in my name only, at banks Linda didn't know about. I converted liquid assets to forms that would be harder to claim in a divorce. I documented every cent Linda had spent from our joint accounts over the past 10 years, building a case for financial infidelity to match the personal kind. I worked on this for 3 weeks, coming home late every night, telling Linda I was swamped with the audit. She seemed relieved by my absence, which told me everything I needed to know about where we stood. Finally, on a Thursday night in April, exactly 1 month after I'd gotten those DNA results, I was ready. I came home at the usual time, 6:30, to find Linda in the kitchen making chicken piccata, one of my favorites. She was humming along to something on her phone, her hair freshly styled, wearing a new dress I hadn't seen before. "You're home early," she said, looking up with what might have been alarm. "Finished up the audit," I said, hanging my jacket by the door. "Thought we could have a nice dinner together. It's been a while." "Oh," she said. "That's nice." We made small talk while she cooked. I set the table, opened a bottle of wine, played the role I'd been playing for 36 years. The good husband. The provider. The fool. We sat down to eat. The chicken was perfect, tender and tangy. Linda had always been a good cook. It was one of the things I loved about her, back when love was something I felt instead of something I remembered feeling. "Linda," I said halfway through the meal, "I need to talk to you about something." She looked up, and I saw it, just for a second, a flash of fear in her eyes. "What about?" she asked, her voice carefully neutral. "I've been thinking about my retirement," I said. "The firm wants me to stay on another 5 years, until I'm 65, but I'm not sure I want to. I've been working hard for a long time. I think maybe it's time to start enjoying life a little." I watched relief flood her face, and I hated her for it. She thought I was talking about golf and travel and grandchildren, not about the fact that I knew every secret she'd been keeping. "That sounds wonderful," she said, reaching across the table to squeeze my hand. "We could travel, finally. Maybe buy that condo in San Diego you've always talked about." "Maybe," I said. "But first, I want to make sure we're on solid ground financially. So I've been doing some planning, getting all our accounts in order, making sure everything is documented properly." "Of course," she said, withdrawing her hand. "That sounds very responsible. I've also been thinking about the kids," I continued. "About their futures, about what we want to leave them." "Oh?" Now she looked wary. "Yeah. I mean, we've done everything for them, haven't we? Paid for their educations, helped them get started in life. They're good kids. Successful. Happy. They are." Linda agreed. "Makes you proud, doesn't it? Knowing you created something that outlasts you. That your legacy continues through your children." "Yes," she said softly. "It does." I took a sip of wine and looked at her, really looked at her, for the first time in weeks. She was still beautiful, in her way. 56 years old, and she could pass for 45. All that yoga and careful eating and expensive hair color. "Linda," I said, "do you think the kids look like me?" The question hung in the air between us. I saw her face change, saw her calculate whether this was a trap, saw her decide to play it light. Michael has your mannerisms, she said carefully. The way he gestures when he talks. And Sarah definitely has your drive. But physically, I pressed. Do you think they look like me? Like if you saw them on the street and didn't know them, would you think they were my children? I don't know, Harold. That's a strange question. Children don't always look exactly like their parents. No, I agreed. They don't. Sometimes they look like someone else entirely. The silence that followed was deafening. Linda stared at me, her face pale, her hand frozen halfway to her wine glass. Harold, she said finally, what are you saying? And that's when I smiled at her, a real smile, the first genuine expression I'd shown her in a month. I'm saying, I replied calmly, that I think we should finally be honest with each other. Don't you? Linda didn't answer right away. She just stared at me across our dining room table, the one we'd picked out together at a furniture store in Tempe 15 years ago, where we'd sat for thousands of meals, celebrated dozens of birthdays and holidays, where we built the stage set of our perfect family life. Her face cycled through emotions like a broken slot machine, fear, confusion, calculation, defiance, and finally landing on something like resignation. How long have you known? She asked, her voice barely above a whisper. About the affair? Or about the fact that none of our children are actually mine? I said it plainly, without emotion, like I was reading from a financial statement. Linda flinched as if I'd struck her. I don't know what you're talking about, she said, but her voice cracked on the last word. I pulled out my phone, opened my photos, and slid it across the table to her. On the screen were the DNA test results, all 4 of them, with their damning 0% probability of paternity. She looked at the screen for a long moment, then pushed the phone back to me without meeting my eyes. Harold, I can explain. Can you? I interrupted. Can you explain 33 years of lies? 3 different affairs? 3 children that you passed off as mine? Can you explain that, Linda? It's not what you think, she said, and I almost laughed at the cliché of it. Then tell me what it is. Make me understand. I've got all night. She was quiet for a long time, staring down at her plate. When she finally spoke, her voice was different, harder, colder, more honest than I'd heard it in years. Do you remember what it was like when we got married? She asked. You were 25, just starting out at Morrison and Blake. Working 60, 70 hours a week, trying to prove yourself. I was a nurse, working nights, trying to keep us afloat financially because your salary barely covered rent. I remember, I said. I was building a career. Building a future for us. You were absent, she corrected. And when you were home, you were exhausted or stressed or talking about work. We barely had a marriage, Harold. We had a roommate situation where occasionally we had sex. So you had affairs. So I was lonely. She shot back. I was 23 years old, married to a man who was married to his job. David was. He was there. He listened to me. He made me feel seen. And you got pregnant with his child. I got pregnant, she agreed. And I panicked. David was married too, Harold. He had kids of his own. There was no future there. But you wanted children, you'd been talking about starting a family, and I thought maybe this would fix things. Give us something to focus on together. I processed this, the casual way she'd rewritten history to make herself the victim. And the other 2? She took a long drink of wine before answering. Robert happened during a bad patch. You just made partner, you were working even more hours, and I was home alone with a toddler. The tennis club was my outlet, and he was exciting. Different from you. He challenged me intellectually in ways you never did. So you rewarded him by letting him knock you up. It wasn't like that, she said, but there was no conviction in her voice. It just happened. I was on birth control, but nothing's perfect. And by the time I realized I was pregnant, ending it wasn't an option. Why not? Because you were so happy, she said, her voice rising. You were thrilled about having another baby. You talked about giving Michael a sibling, about building our family. How could I tell you the truth? How could I destroy that? So you lied to me for 29 years instead. I protected you, she insisted. I protected our family. I gave you the children you wanted, Harold. I gave you the family you dreamed about. Children that weren't mine. Children that you raised. She countered. Children that you loved and who loved you back. Biology isn't everything, Harold. You were their father in every way that mattered. I sat back in my chair studying her. She actually believed what she was saying. In her mind, she'd done me some kind of favor. And James? I asked. What's his story? Another bad patch? Another convenience pregnancy? Her face hardened. Todd was a mistake. A stupid, impulsive mistake during a time when I was overwhelmed with 2 kids and a husband who was never home. It lasted maybe 3 months before I ended it. But apparently 3 months was enough. His wife found out, didn't she? Christine. That's why they got divorced? Linda nodded slowly. She found some emails. She confronted Todd, and he confessed everything. She kicked him out, divorced him, took him for everything he had. I thought she might tell you, but she never did. I think she was too humiliated. How considerate of her, I said drily. Protecting your secret. Harold, please, Linda said, reaching across the table toward me. I know I made mistakes. Terrible mistakes. But we can work through this. We can go to counseling, we can. Work through it? I interrupted, pulling my hand away from hers. Linda, you had 3 affairs and 3 children with 3 different men. You let me believe they were mine for decades. You let me pour my life into raising them, supporting them, loving them. You let me be their father while knowing I wasn't. That's not a mistake. That's a betrayal so profound I don't even have words for it. They don't have to know, she said desperately. We can keep this between us. The kids never have to find out. Nothing has to change. Everything has already changed, I said. The moment I got those test results, everything changed. So what, you're going to tell them? Destroy their lives? Destroy our family? Her voice was getting shrill now, panicked. I don't know what I'm going to do yet, I said, which was a lie. I knew exactly what I was going to do, but I wasn't ready to show my hand. Please, Harold, she begged. Think about the kids. Think about Michael and Sarah and James. They love you. You're the only father they've ever known. If you tell them the truth, it will devastate them. Is that what you want? To hurt them just to hurt me? And there it was, the manipulation I'd lived with for 36 years, so subtle I'd never quite recognized it for what it was. The way she'd always framed things in terms of the children's needs, the family's needs, anything but honest communication between us. I'm not trying to hurt anyone, I said. I'm trying to figure out what's real and what's been a lie. And right now, Linda, I'm discovering it's almost all been a lie. She started crying then, big theatrical sobs that I'd seen 1,000 times before. Crying when she wanted something, crying when she was caught in something, crying to short-circuit my anger and make me the comforter instead of the confronter. But this time, I just watched. I didn't move to hold her. I didn't offer tissues or reassurances. I just sat there and waited for her to realize that this particular performance wasn't going to work. When she finally looked up and saw my face, calm, analytical, unmoved, something shifted in her expression. The tears stopped like someone had turned off a faucet. You're going to divorce me, she said flatly. Probably, I agreed. And you're going to tell the kids? I don't know yet. Like I said, I'm still thinking things through. You bastard, she hissed. After everything I've done for you, after all the years I've stood by you. Stood by me? I couldn't help laughing at that. Is that what you call screwing 3 different men and passing off their children as mine? Standing by me? I kept your home, she shouted. I raised those children. I made sure you had the perfect life, the perfect family, so you could focus on your precious career. Do you have any idea how hard it was, managing everything, being there for the kids while you worked 80-hour weeks? Hard enough that you had to find comfort in the arms of multiple men? I asked. My heart breaks for you, Linda. Really. We stared at each other across the table, the pretense of our marriage finally stripped away completely. I saw her clearly for the first time in years, not as my wife, not as the mother of my children, but as she actually was. A woman who'd been lying to me since before our first child was born. A woman who'd made choices that served her needs and then built elaborate justifications for them. What do you want, Harold? She asked finally, her voice cold and businesslike. Money? The house? Tell me what it's going to take to keep this quiet. And there it was, the assumption that everything could be solved with negotiation, that I could be bought off or bargained with. I want, I said slowly, to make sure that I'm protected. That if something happens to me, an accident, a sudden illness, anything, there's a clear trail of what really happened here. I saw fear flash across her face again. What are you talking about? I'm talking about the life insurance policies you took out on me, Linda. 3 of them, totaling $8 million. I'm talking about the divorce attorney you consulted and then decided not to use. I'm talking about the fact that I'm worth more to you dead than divorced. Her face went white. You think Harold, I would never. I don't know what you would or wouldn't do. I interrupted. A month ago, I would have said you'd never cheat on me or lie to me about our children. But here we are. So I'm taking precautions. What kind of precautions? I've documented everything. The affairs, the paternity tests, your financial infidelity. I've given copies to my attorney, with instructions to release them if anything happens to me. I've had a full physical, including a tox screen. I've changed my beneficiaries on everything. If I die under suspicious circumstances, Linda, you won't see a dime. And everyone will know why. She stared at me like she'd never seen me before. Maybe she hadn't. Maybe she'd only ever seen the version of me she needed me to be, the absent workaholic, the convenient father, the fool who never asked questions. Jesus Christ, Harold, she breathed. What happened to you? I got informed, I said simply. And now I'm taking my time to decide what to do with that information. The next week was the strangest of my life. Linda and I moved around each other like wary animals, polite on the surface but waiting for the other to make the next move. She slept in the guest room without discussing it. I heard her on the phone sometimes, late at night, her voice low and urgent. Talking to Richard, probably. Or maybe to an attorney of her own. I went to work, came home, maintained the appearance of normalcy. But every moment, my mind was working on the problem, turning it over from every angle like I would a complex audit. The thing was, I didn't want revenge in the traditional sense. I didn't want to destroy Linda, despite what she'd done. We'd had 36 years together, and some of them had been good, or at least I thought they had been. Who knows what was real anymore? But I also couldn't just let it go. Couldn't pretend I didn't know what I knew. Couldn't keep living a lie. And then there were the kids. Michael called that weekend, like he did every Sunday. We talked about his job, his kids, weekend plans. The whole time, I was studying his voice, listening for traces of myself in it, and finding none. He sounded like himself, just Michael. But was there something of David Morrison in his confidence, his easy charm? Sarah texted me an article about something happening in the tech world. Thought you might find this interesting, Dad. I read it, understood maybe a quarter of it, and texted back some generic encouragement. She signed off with, "Love you," and I stared at those words for a long time. James didn't reach out. He rarely did these days, caught up in his life in LA, in his struggles and his dreams. But I found myself scrolling through his Instagram, looking at photos of him at auditions, at parties, living the life he'd chosen. He looked happy, or at least he looked like he was trying to be happy. These were my children. Or were they? The semantics of it drove me crazy. I'd raised them. I'd loved them. I still loved them, despite everything. Biology didn't change that, couldn't change that. But it changed everything else. On Wednesday, I made a decision. I called Michael and asked if he could come down to Phoenix that weekend. Said I needed to talk to him about something important. He sounded worried but agreed. I made the same call to Sarah. She could get away from Seattle for a few days. James was trickier. He was in the middle of callbacks for some play, couldn't leave LA. But I insisted. It's important, I told him. Family meeting. I need all of you here. That got his attention. We never had family meetings. Is someone sick? He asked, anxiety creeping into his voice. Is Mom okay? Everyone's healthy, I assured him. I just need to talk to all of you together. Please, James. This matters. He must have heard something in my voice, because he agreed. Linda knew something was up. I saw her watching me, trying to figure out my angle. On Thursday night, she finally asked, "What are you doing, Harold?" I was in the home office, ostensibly working on some reports. Working, I said without looking up. You called the kids? Asked them all to come home? What are you planning? A family dinner, I said calmly. Is that so strange? You're going to tell them, she said, and it wasn't a question. I'm going to talk to them, I corrected. What I tell them depends on a lot of factors. Harold, please, she said, and I heard real desperation in her voice now. Don't do this. Don't destroy them. Whatever you're angry about, take it out on me, but leave the kids out of it. I finally looked up at her. Linda, the kids are the whole point. They're the center of this. How can I leave them out of it? Because telling them the truth serves no purpose except to hurt them, she said. Think about it, Harold. Really think. What good does it do for Michael to learn that David Morrison is his biological father? For Sarah to find out about Robert? For James to know about Todd? It doesn't change who they are. It doesn't change that you raised them. It changes who I am, I said quietly. It changes my entire identity. For 33 years I've been a father. That was the most important thing about me. Not my career, not my accomplishments, not anything else. I was Dad. And now I find out I never was, not really. So yeah, Linda, it changes things. For me, and probably for them too. You're being selfish, she said. This is about your ego. My ego? I felt anger rise in me for the first time since that night at dinner. My ego? Linda, you're the one who had affairs. You're the one who got pregnant by other men. You're the one who lied for decades. And I'm the one being selfish for wanting to acknowledge the truth? The truth doesn't matter, she shouted. What matters is family. What matters is love. You love those kids, Harold. I know you do. Are you really going to throw that away just to make some kind of point? I'm not throwing anything away, I said. I'm just deciding whether to keep living in a fantasy or to deal with reality. And I'm giving the kids the same choice. They deserve to know the truth about where they came from. They deserve to be happy. Linda shot back. They deserve to live their lives without having their foundation ripped out from under them. You want to know what'll happen if you tell them? Michael will feel like a fraud. Sarah will question every accomplishment. And James, God, Harold, James is barely holding it together as it is. This could break him. Or it could free them. I said. Did you ever think of that? Maybe living with a lie is harder than living with the truth. We stared at each other, and I saw something like hatred flash in her eyes. Good, I thought. At least that's honest. If you do this, she said quietly, I'll never forgive you. That's fine, I replied. I don't forgive you either. She left the office, and I heard her go upstairs, heard the guest room door slam. I sat there in the quiet, my hands shaking slightly, and wondered if I was doing the right thing. But no. I knew I was. Because the alternative was to keep living the lie, and I couldn't do that. Not anymore. That Saturday, they all arrived. Michael flew in Friday night, rented a car, stayed at a hotel because the house felt tense, he said. Sarah came Saturday morning, took an Uber from the airport. James landed around noon, looking thin and tired but trying to project energy. They gathered in the living room, the three of them on the couch, looking at Linda and me like we'd called them in for some kind of intervention. "So," Michael said, always the leader. "What's this about, Dad?" I looked at them, these three people I'd raised, and felt my resolve waver. They looked worried. They looked like kids again, despite being adults, despite having lives of their own. They looked like they were bracing for bad news. And I was about to give them the worst news of their lives. "There's something I need to tell you all," I started. "Something about our family that you don't know. That I didn't know until recently." "Oh God," Sarah said. "Someone is sick." "Dad, are you?" "No one's sick," I interrupted. "Everyone's physically fine. This is different." I took a breath, glanced at Linda. She was staring at the floor, her jaw tight, her hands clenched in her lap. "I'm going to tell you something that's going to be hard to hear," I continued. "And I want you to know, before I say it, that I love you all. That hasn't changed and will never change. But you deserve to know the truth." "Harold, don't," Linda said quietly. I ignored her. "A few weeks ago, I took a DNA test. One of those ancestry things. And when I got the results back, I noticed something strange. None of you showed up as my children." The silence in the room was absolute. The three of them stared at me, processing, not quite understanding yet. "What?" Michael said finally. "What do you mean we didn't show up?" "I mean the test showed we don't share DNA," I said. So I did more tests. Proper paternity tests. And they all came back the same way. None of you are biologically my children." Sarah gasped. James went pale. Michael just sat there, his face frozen in shock. "That's not possible," Michael said. "There must be some mistake. Those tests aren't always accurate." "They're accurate," I said. "I used multiple companies. Multiple samples. The results are conclusive." "So what are you saying?" Sarah asked, her voice shaking. "That Mom." All three of them turned to look at Linda. She was crying now, silent tears streaming down her face, but she didn't deny it. "Oh my God!" James whispered. "Oh my God!" "Who?" Michael demanded, standing up. "Who's my father then?" I could have told them. I had the names, the evidence, the photos. But as I looked at their faces, shocked, hurt, confused, I realized something. This wasn't about revenge on them. It never had been. "That's not why I brought you here," I said. They stared at me, waiting. Linda looked up, confusion mixing with her tears. "I brought you here," I continued, "because I wanted you to know the truth. But also because I wanted to tell you something else." I sat down in the armchair across from them, suddenly feeling every one of my 58 years. For the last month, I'd been angry. Angrier than I've ever been in my life. I felt betrayed, humiliated, like my entire existence had been a lie. And I spent a lot of time thinking about revenge. About how to make your mother pay for what she did. About whether to expose her affairs, to tell everyone in our lives what happened, to destroy her reputation the way she destroyed my sense of identity. I paused, looking at each of them in turn. And then I realized something. The revenge I wanted wasn't about punishment. It was about truth. About living authentically instead of living a lie. So here's what I'm going to do. I pulled out 3 envelopes from my pocket and set them on the coffee table. These contain information about your biological fathers. Names, contact information, photographs. Everything I found. You can open them if you want. You can reach out to these men, get to know them, do DNA tests of your own. Or you can throw them away and never think about it again. That's your choice. Michael reached for his envelope, then pulled his hand back. Sarah stared at hers like it might bite her. James didn't move at all. "The thing is," I continued, Biology doesn't change history. It doesn't change the fact that I was there when each of you was born. That I walked you to school on your first days. That I taught you to ride bikes and drive cars and balance checkbooks. It doesn't change the fact that I love you. How can you still love us? James asked, his voice breaking. After finding out we're not yours? Because you are mine, I said simply. Maybe not genetically, but in every other way that matters. I raised you. I'm your father. A DNA test doesn't change that. But it changes everything, Sarah said. Doesn't it? Everything we thought we knew about ourselves, about our family. It changes the story. I agreed. But it doesn't have to change us. That's what I've learned this past month. We get to decide what defines us. Not our genes, not our past, but our choices moving forward. I turned to Linda, who was watching me with an expression I couldn't quite read. I'm divorcing your mother, I said, addressing the kids again. Not because of what she did 33 years ago, or 29, or 26. But because of what she's doing now. Because she's still lying, still having affairs, still choosing to live dishonestly. And I can't be part of that anymore. Dad, Michael started, but I held up my hand. Let me finish. I'm divorcing her, but I'm not cutting any of you out of my life. You're still my children if you want to be. I'm still your father if you'll have me. What happened between your mother and me doesn't have to affect my relationship with any of you. But what about? Sarah gestured helplessly. What about family holidays? Sunday dinners? What about when I get married, or when Michael's kids have birthdays, or… We figure it out, I said. The same way any divorced family figures it out. It won't be easy, and it won't be the same. But we can make it work if we all want to. James stood up suddenly, crossing to where I sat. He knelt down and hugged me, hard, his shoulders shaking. You're my dad, he said fiercely. You're my dad, and I don't care what any test says. I felt something break open in my chest, and I hugged him back. Michael and Sarah joined us, the four of us in a tangle of arms and tears, holding on to each other like we were drowning. Over their heads, I looked at Linda. She was watching us with something like devastation on her face, and I realized this was the revenge. Not rage or exposure or public humiliation. The revenge was this: I was taking away her power. The power of the secret she'd kept for decades. The power to control the narrative. The power to keep us all living in her version of reality. By telling the truth, by choosing honesty over comfortable lies, by showing the kids that love was stronger than genetics, I was taking back my life. Our lives. And Linda? She'd have to live with the consequences of her choices. That was punishment enough. When we finally pulled apart, I addressed them all one more time. Here's what I want you to understand. Your mother made choices that hurt me deeply. But those choices gave me you three. And I wouldn't trade that for anything. You've been the best part of my life. You still are. Even though we're not really your kids? Michael asked. You are really my kids, I corrected. That's what I'm trying to tell you. The story of how you came into this world might be different than I thought, but the story of us, of our family, that's real. That's what matters. I stood up, feeling lighter than I had in weeks. So that's my revenge, I said. Not destruction. Not punishment. Just truth. Just choosing to live honestly from now on, and hoping you'll all choose the same thing. Sarah picked up her envelope, held it for a moment, then set it back down. I don't need to know, she said. Not right now, anyway. Maybe someday, but you're my dad. That's enough. Michael nodded slowly, leaving his envelope on the table too. James didn't even look at his. We talked for hours after that. They asked questions, I answered as honestly as I could. Linda mostly sat in silence, occasionally trying to defend herself, but mostly just listening as we rebuilt the story of our family from the ground up. It wasn't pretty. There were tears and anger and confusion. But there was also love. Real love, the kind that survives truth instead of requiring lies. That night, after the kids left, I started packing my things. I'd already found an apartment, already made plans. I was moving out the next day, starting over at 58 years old. As I folded clothes into boxes, I thought about revenge. Real revenge isn't about making someone else suffer. It's about refusing to suffer yourself. It's about taking back your power, your truth, your life. Linda had stolen 33 years from me. But by choosing honesty, by refusing to live her lie any longer, I was taking back everything that mattered. The kids were still mine. The love was still real. And my life, from this moment forward, would be lived on my own terms. That was my revenge. And it was beautiful. 3 years later, I sit in my apartment in Scottsdale, and all 3 of my kids still call me Dad. We have dinner together monthly. I've been to Sarah's wedding, watched James in his first major theater production, and my grandchildren through Michael still run to hug me when they see me. Linda remarried, Richard, as it turned out. I hear they're happy, though we don't speak. The envelopes remain unopened, as far as I know. Maybe someday the kids will want to know. Maybe they won't. Either way, it's their choice. And me? I'm living honestly for the first time in decades. No more secrets. No more lies. Just truth, even when it's hard. That's the thing about revenge. The best kind doesn't destroy anyone. It just sets you free.